races for Penn State and Ohio State coming up this weekend. It's been a titanic battle that has really ruled the Big Ten and defined the Big Ten for the past two seasons. Of course, the Buckeyes coming back from 18 down in the second half last year to upend the Nittany Lions and decide the division and finally the conference. And then 2 years ago, of course, it was Penn State, kind of the crescendo of their move back to the pinnacle of college football in the Big Ten with the win on the special teams plays in Happy Valley 24-21. We bring in one of our longtime guests here, Tim Aidan from Black Shoe Diaries on the SB Nation platform for Penn State football. Tim, how you doing tonight?
Doing good, Mark. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. Great to see you.
Likewise.
Tim, this has to be a difficult week just in regards to there's so much buildup and so much hype, and it's Wednesday night, and you probably just can't wait for the game to just get here.
Well, precisely. I'm already thinking about how this time tomorrow night I'll be driving up to Happy Valley, getting up there about a day early. But the game, obviously, I think ever since the final seconds ticked off the clock in Champaign, Illinois last Friday night, this game has been on the minds of everyone. Although I would argue, I think for us fans, we were thinking about this game probably 2 weeks ago. But for the players, for Coach Franklin especially, as you know, he likes to tweet out the opponent's name about 50 times at the beginning of the week to emphasize, we're only focused on the opponent that's coming up. So this week it is about Ohio State, Ohio State, Ohio State, Ohio State, Ohio State for him and the players. As far as, the matchup's concerned, this is a battle between the top two scoring offenses in college football right now. And I kid you not, if you think I am pulling your chain, you can look it up. The number one and number two scoring offenses are facing off in State College Saturday night. So that's something in all my years of watching Penn State football, I can't recall a matchup of two titanic offenses like that. So one would naturally expect, especially considering how shaky the defenses have been, particularly on the Penn State side. It would not surprise me if both teams crossed 40 points Saturday night.
MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football, talking of the big matchup in the Big Ten. It has been the matchup of the year the past 2 years. We expect no less here in 2018. Penn State hosting Ohio State in Happy Valley for another whiteout against the Buckeyes. We've got Tim Aidan on the line from Black Shoe Diaries. Of course, we've got the live chat in full session, so please leave any comments or questions you have there. I'll be monitoring. Otherwise, Tim and I will talk up the Buckeyes and the Nittany Lions. There was a lot of panic, at least on my channel, after the App State game, considering you needed the final drive of regulation with Trace McSorley expertly leading the group down the field for the game-tying touchdown, and then, of course, the win in overtime preserved by the interception in the end zone. But the team has obviously performed much better since and to the standards that you would have expected.
Oh, precisely. And I think in retrospect now we've played a few games. App State's played a couple more games since then. I would say I think App State was the toughest non-conference opponent and probably the toughest opponent we've faced thus far. I'm pretty sure it's going to change on Saturday, but if you noticed, App State's crushed their last two opponents in Charlotte, and I have to look up the other team real quick. I think Gardner-Webb. They put up 72 on Gardner-Webb, which is something you'd expect to see that from a Power 5 school playing a thing like Gardner-Webb, and for App State to do that, Group of 5 school, it kind of sends a message. But interesting stat from their other win against Charlotte, their quarterback, Zach Thomas, was a perfect 14 for 14 before he got pulled from the game in favor of the second stringers. So he may actually be a pretty legit quarterback. It may not just be Penn State's got problems in the secondary, which they kind of do, but beside the point.
Tim, in preparing for the game, I was checking on Trace McSorley's numbers and looking through the entire team, both offensively and defensively. I saw the Illinois game almost start to finish. I saw App State last couple drives in overtime because of what was happening right then in college football, obviously, with other games seemingly being more important. Than suddenly, wow, Penn State's in a struggle. Had to check out the end of that game. And that's what I've seen out of the Nittany Lions. But I was a bit surprised to see 54% next to Trace McSorley's passing stats because the offense has been so prolific. Has there been an adjustment in the passing game minus Deshaun Hamilton and Mike Gesicki?
I think a lot. I think that stat is due in a large part to cases of the drops from normally reliable receivers like Juwan Johnson and DeAndre Tompkins earlier. The first couple of games. Since then, both of them have started to get on the right track as far as actually holding on to the ball. Juwan Johnson, most notably, last week against Illinois, came up with a very clutch touchdown grab in the fourth quarter when Penn State was still clinging to a 28-24 lead. I think they had just gotten penalized after Trace McSorley supposedly caught a touchdown on a trick play, but they called it back because of illegal formation. I think it's a legal formation penalty. So they called it back. It's 3rd and long, and Trace just fires a nice dart to the end zone. Juwan Johnson grabs it between a couple defenders. So I think he was a leading receiver, actually. 4 catches, 51 yards, and that touchdown. So, he had definitely stepped it up in a manner that we were hoping he would starting from game 1, but better late than never. Tompkins, of course, got it going against Kent State, caught a touchdown there. But yeah, in a way, you could say they do miss having a guy like Deshaun, who is a very sure-handed person that you could rely on. And of course, having a tall target like Mike Gesicki certainly helps you in the red zone. Although I say now they've traded in exchange for Gesicki's catching abilities. They've actually traded that for tight ends that are actually good in the blocking aspect of the game. That was the one big knock on Gesicki. He was not a very good blocker. But a couple guys in Jonathan Holland and Pat Freiermuth. Freiermuth, shout out to him. He had his first career touchdown grab against Illinois as well in the early going, and he actually he was wide open at the 5-yard, caught it, and almost lost his footing going into the end zone. He fell and barely got in, but because he was so excited, he saw nothing but open space. But so there's definitely young guys that are finding their way, and it's also just a matter of the more veteran receivers who got off to a slow start, and now they're starting to, I think, hit their stride. But that has affected Trace's numbers in a way. I think if they were able to catch earlier in the year, I think his numbers would be probably in the 60s at least.
And I'll back up your shout out to Freiermuth because he actually joined us here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, while he was still in the recruiting process. So we appreciate the conversation there. So yeah, you folks that follow Penn State football, you can look back at yesteryear before the decision was made and look up one of the videos. Also, of course, to get yourself primed and ready from a Penn State perspective on the Buckeyes and the Nittany Lions, you go to Black Shoe Diaries on the SB Nation platform for Penn State and join Tim and the rest of the crew there. As I'm sure that you guys have talked to the Ohio State clan as well to get that half of the matchup and set up that side of it as well.
Yeah, so I mean, I haven't talked too much to Ohio State folks, but I guess that you bring it up, I do have an interesting story to tell. It's sort of off topic, but not really because it does involve this game. I was, since Penn State was played on Friday night, I had Saturday free. So, like any responsible adult, I went and did grocery shopping at my local Wegmans, and passing by, like not just Wegmans, but any store, they have the people passing out samples and stuff. So, this guy I'm passing by offers me a chicken cacciatore sample. So, of course, I take it. And it was delicious. And then he sees I happened to be wearing a Penn State shirt that day, and so he sees it. He asks, "Did you go to Penn State?" And I said, "Yes," because I'm an Ohio State alum. And so then we just get into talking about the game. It was basically a 5-10 minutes back and forth about what scared us about each other's teams. So for me, I was telling him, I'm concerned about the defense's ability to contain Dwayne Haskins, and especially the ground, that 1-2 punch of J.K. Dobbins and Mike Weber. And then meanwhile, he's scared to death of the whiteout atmosphere and of Trace McSorley. So it was a very interesting back and forth, very cordial, wished her the best of luck kind of thing. But so that's my main interaction with Buckeye fans this week. I know on Black Shoe Diaries we have someone who does cross blog interviews, so that should be going up probably tomorrow, I would think.
So yeah, that's a great thing about college football, in addition to a lot of other things, that kind of shared camaraderie, at least out of the 98% that are sane and love their team, but still can settle it down, pull it back, not to unleash the venom, and actually have a fun conversation with a rival fan base, and appreciate and have respect for the other fan base and for the other team, and know that, hey, this is a really good program. This is a great all-time program in the case of this matchup. And, this is going to be fun, regardless of how it turns out. Most likely, this is going to be another great football matchup. Now, Tim, we've talked about it a number of times. We've had you on for, I don't know, something like 3 to 4 years. And at the time, we kind of knew it and saw it. But even in the aftermath of that game in 2016, it's played out. Now, if James Franklin sticks around for 10, I don't know, 15 plus years, that might turn out to be the watershed moment for this program, because it certainly looks like it right now. Now, you have to build on that, and they did. But if James Franklin continues to have a program that's going to rank in the top 10 in the nation year in, year out, and going to contend for Big Ten championships and possibly national championships, then that seems to be the game where they took everyone on notice that, hey, we're back.
Well, precisely. I wouldn't say it was the first sign, but it was definitely the 2016 game as Ohio State was definitely the moment where Penn State announced to the college world, like, hey, we're back. And, it was nice to see them finally get back in the top 25 after that win, get back in the national conversation. Because for many years before that, they were talked about, but they were just kind of like an afterthought. You just kind of mentioned them in passing, unless it was something, scandal related. So that was the first time where people were really talking about them, as a legit program, like being amongst the big dogs in college football again on the field success. So, and of course, Franklin's won something like 22-5 overall since that game. So, I mean, that you could say that was a big turning point. I mean, I'd say the first turning point was the Minnesota game a few weeks before that, when they were trailing 13-3 at the half. And then Trace froze this. He escapes the pocket, and then throws a dart to Irvin Charles, who doesn't even really see it coming, but just kind of looks at the last minute behind him and catches the ball, and then races to the end zone. And they eventually win in overtime. But that Ohio State game was the second spark, and probably the biggest spark of all. And so it's crazy to think that was already 2 years ago. Sometimes it just feels like that happened yesterday still. And now, here we are. It's just like top 20. Being in the top 10 just feels like a routine thing. I'd say it feels like, I do feel like I've been following the team since I was about 7-8 years old, early 90s. And I'd say I feel like a kid again, watching the team in the 90s, where you routinely expect them to win, 9-10 games a year. It is a good feeling. But like you said, I think the next step, that's also a very hard step to take, is to be able to take out, Ohio State on a I shouldn't say every, like on a more routine basis. Because if you're going to win get to the playoffs, you win national championships. I feel that the road right now runs through Columbus, Ohio.
It certainly has. Losing 8 games in 7 years is pretty much the landmark of a program that's pretty much dominated the Big Ten since Urban Meyer showed up, and the 1 or 2 losses that he's had at particular times in conference play is basically taken his team out of the college football playoff. So that's how razor close it's been to Ohio State absolutely just going to the college football playoff every year. It's taken the Penn State play, which obviously still ushered the Buckeyes, despite that situation, into the college football playoff. Although Penn State won the Big Ten, I'm thinking of the Michigan State loss the year before, in which Ohio State still finished in the top 4 in the nation when it was all said and done, but missed the playoff there. As you mentioned, you talked about going to the grocery store over the weekend and having that conversation with an Ohio State fan with your Penn State shirt on. For being neutral here, Tim, you see this shirt. It lines up pretty closely. It's on the mark, I would say, in regards to color scheme.
I say it's got a bluish tint.
Bluish tint. This looks Penn State blue. I think I nailed it here. Ricky Slade, Miles Sanders, and replacing Saquon Barkley. How do you think that's gone?
I think it's gone quite well, actually, especially Miles Sanders. He had his obviously had a big game against App State, scored what would be the game-winning touchdown in overtime, but Illinois last Friday was where he really had his coming out party. Rushed for 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. And he just looked, he was just moving piles, running around, cutting around people. He just looked like a unstoppable force. And him and Trace McSorley were like a powerful 1-2 running combination. It seemed like they kept the Illinois defense guessing on the read option every time. They couldn't figure out which one to focus on. They usually guessed wrong as far as who to try and bring down. And it showed Penn State ran for 380 yards, which was the most they had done since 2002 against Michigan State, which I don't know if you know this. We probably remember this game, but it was when Larry Johnson became the first Penn State player to go over 2,000 yards in the season. So that was the game where he did that. And actually, Sanders' performance, 200 yards and 3 touchdowns, he's the first Penn State running back since LJ in that same game to put up those to go 200 yards and score 3 touchdowns in a game. And I think Curtis Enos and Kajana Carter were the other 2 backs who've done it in the last 25 years.
Yes, so Penn State running back lore is quite impressive. And Larry Johnson, of course, during that early 2000s period for that 2002 team. And I'm trying to think who won the Heisman Trophy. Carson Palmer of USC. I would love to go back and look at the numbers because Larry Johnson, as you mentioned, it's not like Carson Palmer led a national championship team at USC. They had a good team. They went to the Orange Bowl. They won, so they had a top 6 or 7 team in the nation. But Penn State, sure, they lost a couple more games, but it wasn't like Larry Johnson lost a Heisman to a national championship winning quarterback. So I would love to go back and check out those numbers because, of course, as you mentioned, Larry Johnson was just racking up ridiculous amounts of yardage that particular season that ended with a loss to Auburn in the Capital One Bowl, if I remember correctly, like 13-9.
Yep, to Auburn.
Yes. All right, we got Tim Aidan on the line talking Penn State football with the Nittany Lions in the big showdown against the Buckeyes of Ohio State. And unless something else happens drastic in this season, this would appear to be, and there are going to be other huge games involving, of course, Michigan and Michigan State and these 2 teams, but this would feel to be the one that's going to set the tone for everything else we're going to see. These are the 2 best teams in the conference as it stands right now. You talked about the defensive play or lack thereof. On the Ohio State side, certainly they have one of the top 5 most talented defenses in the country. They've had their slip-ups. TCU made them look bad for the most part for about 3 quarters until they really kicked it into gear and disrupted the plays in the backfield and kind of willed their way to a win, and much of that was on defense. On the Penn State side, do you think that this is the Penn State defense we're going to see the rest of the year, or do you think that they have the pieces in place to shore up the defense and be a very capable top 10 or 15 type of defense?
Well, it is unfortunately kind of a little more inexperienced defense, and especially at the linebacking unit, they've been hurt. The years of recruiting misses and guys transferring has kind of hurt the depth there. So, Brent Pryce tried to make the most of what he has. Manning the middle, so you have Jan Johnson starting at the Mike spots. Then you got Cam Brown on the one side, and then you got Koa Farmer on the other side. Brown is probably the most athletic at starting group, but he does have issues sometimes with being out of position. That's also been issues with the other 2 backers at times. There's also a couple freshman studs, Micah Parsons, who rocks LeVar Arrington's old number 11 jersey. Him and Jesse Lucchetta, both true freshmen, have seen their share of action. Parsons, you just see it on the field. He just has such great athleticism, but just like he also has problems with being out of position on certain, which has led to, teams being able to pick up big yardage on the ground. Teams that maybe they otherwise should be able to stop, but they have found themselves with trouble stopping the run, at least in the first half of games. You saw it against Pitt. You saw it again against Illinois. They have, to their credit, been able to adjust in the second half and eventually get some stops. The D-line, you got Yetur Gross-Matos and Sharif Miller, especially, who's probably the best guy in that, leading that unit right now. He picked up a couple of Robert Windsor picked up a sack against Illinois. Miller picked up a couple against Kent State the other week. But Miller had the most amount of hype coming into the season, and he's been doing a pretty good job living up to that. Secondary, that's also, they've had their moments, like Amani Owari has come up with a few big-time interceptions, including the one against App State in overtime to stave off the upset. But they've also given up some big plays too, and it saddens me to see John Reed, coming back from that ACL injury which caused him to miss all of 2017. It's just clear right now he's not what he used to be. Maybe in time he can get better, but he was getting burned a little too often, picked up a bad pass interference penalty. So I look for Tariq Castro-Fields to start in his place opposite Oruwariye. The safeties, I'd say the biggest improvement I've seen so far has been from the safeties. Garrett Taylor especially. He's gotten pretty comfortable out there now. He's become solid in run supports and just a very hard-hitting guy. And same with Nick Scott. They're both starting safeties. So that's a positive there. They just got to be able, if they can, the key to this game, I think, is can they get any kind of pass rush at all at some point during the game? Because especially in the second half, when they're clinging to a small lead, can they get enough pressure on Dwayne Haskins and force him to actually try and beat them with his feet? Because he's known right now he's like the opposite of JT Barrett, I would say. He's got a very good arm. Not the fastest guy, but very good arm. Whereas Barrett was more of a runner type. So the key is, can they pressure Haskins? Can they contain Dobbins and Weber enough where they're not running wild on everybody? If they can do that, they've got a chance.
Yeah. So point well taken on the Barrett Haskins comparison. I'll bring it a little bit more to the center, where Barrett more run heavy than pass heavy. Haskins the flip opposite of sorts, but not on both ends of the spectrum. It's not like JT Barrett's service academy quarterback who can't throw it, and Dwayne Haskins can't run at all, that he's not mobile. He doesn't want to run. He's a pass first guy. He's mobile. He can move. He can get out of the pocket. And JT Barrett's not Michael Vick. I will make mention of a lot of people who have been detractors of JT Barrett through the years. Despite his prolific numbers at Ohio State and what he was able to accomplish, the guy is on the roster for the New Orleans Saints right now. So one of the most credited offensive minds in the NFL saw fit to draft him and bring him on board, and Sean Payton. So JT Barrett is not necessarily the scrub that many people play him out to be. That said, this Ohio State offense, much like what we've seen with Alabama, is just a different breed now with Dwayne Haskins pulling the trigger back there. He can really stretch the defense. So it's going to be, what we saw of JT Barrett in the fourth quarter against Penn State was a bit of an aberration of what we saw out of JT Barrett out of the last couple of years that he played in college. But out of Dwayne Haskins, this is pretty much what he brings each and every week. He's throwing up like 21 for 24 and 30 of 33 type passing games against these teams. Certainly not Penn State caliber, but still Power 5 teams. He's been tearing them up thus far. So it's a challenge.
Absolutely. I mean, every time we were watching the other team's quarterbacks get big pass plays on us, especially in the first half, me and my Black Shoe Diaries colleagues in our Slack channel kept saying, if we play like this against Ohio State, Haskins is going to have a field day against us. And so, I mean, I don't know what more I can say about him, and the bevy of receivers they've got. I mean, Paris Campbell, McLaurin, I forget his first name, Austin Mack. I mean, it's just a deep collection of blue chippers like a never-ending supply of blue chippers. It seems like at the receiving spots and tight ends. So, to have a trigger man like Haskins, be able to throw to all those guys. I mean, like I said, the key is they're going to have to establish some kind of pass rush, throw Haskins off balance. Don't let him get comfortable in that pocket.
All right, folks in the live chat, please trash talk about college football, not any personal attacks there. So I don't want to have to monitor the live chat and kick people out, but I'm hearing about a number of comments going back and forth that would not be. Take Tim's story from earlier in the segment here. He gets together with an Ohio State fan at a grocery store. And are they picking a fight? Are they, sticking their thumbs in each other's chests and getting into it? No. And does Tim like Ohio State? Hell no, he doesn't like Ohio State. And this other guy doesn't like Penn State, but they can still have a nice conversation and appreciate what we have here talking college football. It's a great thing. And if you don't have the other team, see, here's the deal. You can't play. See, if you don't have another team to play, they're kind of integral to the entire sport here, because otherwise, if you just have the good guys, then you don't have any bad guys to play against. So that kind of is what makes it fun. So please just be respectful of people in the live chat. Tim Aidan, you got to join him and the rest of the crew there at Black Shoe Diaries on the SB Nation platform for Penn State football as the Nittany Lions try to take a huge step toward winning the Big Ten championship. I saw some numbers that seemed rather obvious to me, Tim, that let's wrap our minds around this, that if Penn State wins, they will increase their chances to get to the college football playoff. And if Ohio State loses, it will decrease their chances to get to the college football playoff. Inversely, if Ohio State wins, they will increase their chances to get to the playoff and decrease Penn State's chances. So I saw this over and over on Sunday and Monday, and I thought, who are they taking us for? We understand. Yeah, the team that wins will have a better chance of making the playoffs, and the team that loses will decrease their chances of making the playoffs. You don't have to beat this into our heads. We get how the program works here. All right, Tim, we appreciate it. We hope you enjoy the game. Have a safe trip up to Happy Valley. Enjoy the whiteout, the game. The atmosphere is unlike any other. Urban Meyer called it one of the top 5 in college football this week, and certainly he has had to experience the wrath of the whiteout, and it's been a tremendous game here the last few years.
Thanks for having me.